For those of you who don't know me, I'm Linda Katz-Wilner, and I'm the founder and director of Successfully Speaking. I've been running this webinar, Hard Facts About Soft Skills, really for the past 2 years, but since January, we've been doing it online with our guests, and we've been gearing it towards HR professionals. For the best experience, Kristyn, if we can just move to the next slide. For the best experience, let me explain a little bit about how we're going to do this. It is an hour that's reserved for this time, but we plan to have 30 minutes of content and include breakout groups like I mentioned. But we do want you to interact. We want your questions. We want your comments. Please use the chat box to post any comments you might have about some of the things that Kristyn might be talking about, or if you have questions about that. We definitely have a hard stop at 1, but to respect your time, we plan on finishing up with our Q&A at 12:45, but Kristyn and I will stay here for those of you who may have more questions. And then at the very end, we are going to have a survey. Please respond to that. It gives us ideas of how we did, what we could do better, what other topics you might want, and give us just some feedback on how we conducted this webinar interview. So the next thing I'd like to do is, I am so excited to have Kristyn Berger here. Kristyn Berger is the founder and president of Berger HR Solutions. And she provides employers of all different size organizations with human resources and organizational development solutions. I met Kristyn, probably Kristyn, a little over a year ago, maybe 2 years, because we have a time warp now. I'm not sure when it was, but I met Kristyn and I was so impressed with the scope of her expertise. And I knew she would be a wonderful person to interview. Now, when we set this up, this was way before COVID-19. So we didn't even think about the applications of her content, her topic, and how it would be appropriate for everybody. We didn't realize how many people would be working from home. And I must say, we have a record-breaking attendance for people who have registered. I know some want the recording and some want to be here live. And so I know it's a great topic, and we have a great professional. So welcome, Kristyn, for joining us in this webinar.
Thank you so much, Linda, for inviting me, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to speak to you all today.
So the first thing I would like to do with all the people who have responded, and I know we have a form and I'm asking what their backgrounds are, a lot of them are not HR professionals, but are very interested in this mostly relevant topic. So I'd like to poll first, just to get an idea who is in the audience. And I'd like you to just respond yes or no, if you're an HR professional, just so we have a sense as to who is here. Okay, so still are a lot of HR professionals. Most of the people have voted. Okay, and somebody else just came in, so if they want to add to the vote. So if you're an HR professional, check off here, and actually I'm going to wait just 30 seconds and I'll end the polling. Okay, so Kristyn, just so you know, 78% of the audience are HR professionals, but we have other people too. And actually, if you have other professions, just type it in the chat box so we have an idea of who's here today. Okay. So that moves us to Kristyn. Let me ask you the first question, and I'm sure everybody's wondering this as well, is tell us how you got started in HR and how you evolved to where you are right now.
Sure. So, as Linda said in her very kind introduction, I'm currently a business owner and president of Berger HR Solutions. But prior to starting my business, I was actually an internal HR professional for quite some time. And when I introduce myself and tell my story, I always joke that I'm an accidental HR professional turned accidental business owner. I never had any intention of being in human resources before I began my career, and then I never really had any intention of becoming a business owner. And so, my story kind of takes me to where I am today. And I thought I could kind of walk all of you through this morning, because I know, all of us as HR professionals tend to get into HR in different ways for different reasons. I do know that there's individuals who study human resources in college and that's their intention and that's the career that they pursue. But I know many, like myself, that's not how you started out in your career in HR. And so for me, my degree was actually in advertising public relations. And so I was in a college of communications and my focus was really strong in PR and marketing. And so, I'll be quite honest, I don't even think that HR was something on my radar when I was in high school and college. I was very much more focused on communications. And so when I started as a professional, I actually started out in the banking industry. And at the time, it was a good, solid job coming out of college with a really great bank. And I thought to myself, I'll start here and really learn the banking business and I'll transition to marketing. That was my plan. And what I found through just honestly luck of things and what I was exposed to early on, we were going through a system conversion. I got to work with the training department as a management trainee to help roll out the systems to the bank. I had some other interactions with HR just through my own onboarding. And I really started thinking, as much as I always thought that I would be in marketing, there's something to human resources. I really connected with the team. I worked with a really great community bank, and I was always curious as to how they created that positive culture and the impact that it had on the people within the organization. So it took a while, as many of you, I'm sure, who've tried to break into HR early on in your career know. I spent several years in the branches, and through an acquisition and some things playing out, I was able to get my first job in HR. And so that's really how I became an HR professional. And what was really interesting, I think, about my story is that, as I said, I worked for a really terrific community bank with a really great culture. But what I found in my HR position is that we were very much viewed by most of the organization as more of an administrative function. We weren't often involved in the beginning of a strategy. Usually we were brought in at the end. And, I think we'll talk about that a little bit when I talk about the shifting perspectives, but it often felt like we were checking boxes, or we would have the C-suite come in and say, we made this decision, can you help us execute, versus us being involved from the beginning.
So, Kristyn, that makes me think of the question we talked about is, do you feel, at the HR professionals in the audience today, do you feel that your HR team, either you or your team, has a seat at that table? And that's a question perhaps we can poll everybody and see what they say about that.
Yes, and I'd love to see how people respond to that.
Okay, so we have a poll on the screen, and do you feel you or your HR team has a seat at the table within your organization? And it will be very interesting to see what the comments are. It's a neck and neck race right now with yes and no. It's pretty balanced, but let's see. So if everybody who's in a position of HR can fill that out and click on it, we'll wait a few more seconds. Anybody else to poll? Okay, so I'll wait a few moments more because some more people are responding. Okay, so why don't we stop it now? And good news and bad news, 67% think they do have it, but a third of the people don't. So what do we do with that information, Kristyn?
So I think that's about what I would expect to see. I've noticed a shift in terms of how organizations are viewing HR professionals over the course of my career. And, I think that's kind of what we're going to get to into, how can you get that seat at the table? So I know for me, being at my first bank, again, it was a wonderful organization, but I didn't feel like we necessarily had a seat at the table. It was more of, we would complement the C-suite more than being part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And, for me personally, one of the ways that I kind of shifted was thinking of myself, quite honestly, in a different way. I mean, I think, I have this next slide here. See if it'll come up here in a moment. But what I started to notice was that, and especially again, this is almost 15 years ago, but there was a tendency for HR professionals to be seen as, I always say, the P's of HR: policing, paper pushing, party planning. And all of those things are at times necessary. And I think, it's important not to lose sight of the fact that there are administrative functions or things we need to do as HR professionals to keep things running in the day-to-day. However, I think it's important not to just put ourselves in that box of like, well, if this doesn't fall under the HR administrative, if this isn't payroll, if this isn't benefits, it doesn't really apply to us. And so, I started thinking of myself even more outside of the box of, is there value that I can add outside of just my HR expertise? And for me in banking, I had come from the branches. So I knew that I had a voice and that I understood the business and I understood the mindset of employees. So I started speaking up more as to, giving advice or recommendations, not just through the HR lens, but thinking as a business person who happened to have the HR experience versus thinking of myself as an HR person first.
How was that received? How do people respond to that?
It's interesting because I think it sometimes it depends on the leader. And, there are those leaders who I think value and, really are hungry for that HR strategic advice. There's others that, do tend to see it more as an HR administrative type function. For me, one of the things that I always battled, at least within my first organization, is I grew up through the ranks of the branches. So to some of the C-suite, I was still the relationship banker that was in the branches coming straight out of college. So I really had to prove myself as a strategic advisor, where interestingly, so I ended up making a swap. I went to M&T Bank, which I'm sure many of those of you on the call are familiar with. And I think because one, I had a lot of experience under my belt and, I was viewed as a long-term professional. And then also just the way that M&T viewed human resources, it was amazing. And that's where it's interesting to see, sometimes just because you're in a place where you don't feel like you have a seat at the table, things can change either within your organization or if you go to another organization where all of a sudden you find that you're front and center.
So that's what happens. What do you see as the focus of the profession now? Because I know I want to be mindful of our time. It's 12:18 and we want to get a lot in by 12:30 and give people some real valuable tools on how to deal with some of the COVID issues. But how do you see the profession shifting?
So I really see it shifting from just looking at it again from a technical aspect and HR expertise to really looking, as you see here, as a strategic business partner. So really someone who does have a seat at the table, has a particular area of expertise in human resources, but brings so much more to the table and really should be part of every discussion, whether it's an obvious HR discussion or not. And I think that's really reflected in the SHRM competency model. So I know we have a lot of HR professionals. You're familiar with SHRM. They have these 9 competencies, which is really interesting is if you look at them, many of these really are applicable across any business professional, not just specific to HR. So I'd be interested, I know, if we can kind of pull the audience on which of these competencies you think are the top 3 competencies for an HR professional.
Right, so you can check off 3. we only want you to check off 3. You could check off all of them. So please don't do that. Check off what you see as the 3 top competencies. Okay, let's see here. Oh my goodness. Some great responses.
I'm very interested, especially because we have a mixed crowd. I'm interested to see from everyone what our top 3 are.
Okay, almost. We have 76% responding. I'm just waiting to see if we get a little bit more. Okay, we'll stop it at 55 seconds to be exact, and we'll end the polling and look at this here. So, Kristyn, the top is relationship management, which I don't think is surprising to you.
No, not at all.
And then 57% is the HR expertise, which you have to have that, right, to be an HR professional.
Yes, yep. And I see leadership and navigation, communication, ethical practice. So, I mean, I think this is very much in line with my thoughts. I think, relationship management, no surprise to me in many ways that's the number 1. I think it's very, very important. Why I'm also happy to see that there's a 57% on the HR expertise and knowledge, because it is extremely important to have that foundation and to have that baseline knowledge, because that's what we can bring to the table as HR professionals. Or I know many of you might be a operations/HR, finance/HR, but who's ever really managing that HR function, I think we do have to bring the knowledge and expertise, but then it's, what do you do with it? So, that's where the relationship management, I mean, if you have the skills, but you don't have the relationships with the C-suite or the leadership team to influence them, or you don't have the communication skills to be able to really articulate, what you're bringing to the table, I find that is often when we as HR professionals can be dismissed. So when I talk to my senior consultants, I would say, it's one thing, like, we're expected to execute flawlessly on the technical parts of HR. Payroll should be flawless. Benefits administration should be flawless. But it's important to elevate those things beyond just the technical piece. So for example, yes, bring compensation data to the business ownership or leadership. That's great. And you want the data to be clean and flawless and to have expertise around that information. But what's even more important is to be able to communicate what the leadership team is seeing in that information and how it could potentially influence them in the decisions that they're making.
And communication, is what I deal with. And that's to me, the most important aspect of soft skills, because if you can't communicate your expertise or the relationships within the organization, you're not going to be effective.
It's a lot of it is the so what. I mean, there's leaders that sit around the C-suite that, might see reports coming out of HR and they're like, so what? This is nice. It looks pretty, but what do I do with this? And I think it's really helping them understand these are business tools. These aren't just HR reports. These are tools that you can use to really drive the success of the organization.
And it's interesting you said so what, because I always use this paradigm of what, so what, and now what. So even if you have the so what and they understand the importance of it, what are they supposed to do with it? And right. I'm assuming as the strategic HR professional, you can educate them on that. So that you are going to use your recommendations.
It's easy to throw down, like I said, compensation data or employee engagement survey results, or, we have a lot of data in HR, which is great. I'm big on data, but then it's, what do you do with it? Because if it sits and gets dusty on someone's desk, there's not a lot of value in it. And quite honestly, leaders see, like, an employee engagement survey is a great example. If you take a survey, but there's no follow-up, or you're not using it to make decisions, it becomes kind of an irrelevant activity that people aren't as willing to engage in the future.
Right. So the next time you come with some survey, they're not going to bother because they don't feel they're listened to.
Exactly. And you slowly lose your chair gets pushed a little bit back from the
Mhm,
table because
mhm.
it's not seen as something that's upfront and valuable.
So here's my next question,
Yeah.
Kristyn. In this time of COVID-19 pandemic, I know that all the HR professionals that I have relationships with are swamped with challenges every day. And of course, the big word unprecedented comes about,
Yes.
or innovative comes about. How can HR professionals best support their organization during this time? What are your thoughts about that?
I think, again, it's unprecedented. I can say, other than the financial crisis, I've seen nothing like this in my human resources career. And I think it really challenges us, especially as HR professionals, to really step outside of that box and look at things more holistically and think about the business as a whole. It's easy to get kind of into the day-to-day HR functions, but right now with COVID-19, there's so many things to think about that aren't part of our normal day-to-day. And so I think, the value that I'm seeing, like we as consultants at Berger HR Solutions can offer, and you as an internal HR person can offer, is kind of twofold. It's one, still be that the HR expert and technician. And I think one of the best things you can do in that area is really stay up to date with the various regulations, changes, and things that are coming down the pike. And a great way to do that, I have some detailed slides in here I'm not going to go through in detail, but for example, the Families First Corona Response Act. If you're not familiar with it, you should be. And fortunately, there's a lot of great information out there. So go to original sources. The best place to go for the FFCRA is the Department of Labor. I'm a big fan of going directly to the source. There's lots of great information and explanations. If you still have a hard time understanding all of the details, reach out to an expert, your employment attorney, an HR consultant like myself, someone who can walk you through.
Mhm.
Another area that I know a lot of HR professionals and operations folks are getting pulled into is the PPP. I would never expect anyone to be an expert in PPP, but again, know enough information to be helpful, find resources, the accountants out there, the bookkeepers, the bankers, get as much information as you can. Again, there's a lot of great information on various sites like the DOL, Maryland State information. But then there's a lot of webinars out there. And I know everyone's kind of getting burnt out on webinars, but look for those webinars that will help fill in the gaps of your knowledge. So, that's kind of the technical piece, is make sure that you're up to date on some of the regulations and things specifically that impact employees. But then also on the flip side, make sure that you don't lose sight of being strategic. So, one of the things that I've been noticing is that so many professionals, HR and everyone across the board, are so concentrated on getting through today or getting through this month and focusing on the regulations, getting PPP money, making sure the business is today is still lucrative. They're tending to forget that there's employees who are keeping these businesses running. And I think where we can really add through the HR lens with the business is thinking about, how is this impacting our people? Not just today, not just this month, but what's the impact going to be long term? And I like this. I like this image. I like talking about Maslow's hierarchy of needs in terms of employee engagement, because it really shows you, if people are worried about survival and security, it's really hard for people to perform. And I think security and survival have been extremely tested by COVID-19. And it's short-sighted to lose, to not see that employees are impacted, in some cases very severely. And I think where we can help as HR professionals from a strategic level is, how do we set our employees up for success? How do we message things to them so that we're honest and we're transparent, but also are creating even if we can't provide them the same level of security and survival they felt before COVID-19, that they at least know what to expect from our business, that they feel like they are getting the information that they need, and that we can kind of temper some of those fears. And it's very easy as business owners, again, I've seen it with a lot of my clients, to kind of lose sight of the fact that there's a lot of employees out there who are kind of wondering, what does all of this mean to me? And I think that's an area where we can really help with communication.
So perhaps it could even be an opportunity for your organization to shine by how they deal with it. Because I'm sure some of them are not shining just because they may not be as engaged with the employees. So I know we try to put a spin and flip on the positive side of this. And hopefully, if you do the right things, that's going to make people feel more engaged or more committed to the organization, maybe even if you have to furlough them. I don't know.
And it's
how you do it.
It's all about the communication, because I think, for a furloughed employee, for example, that puts a lot of questions in their mind.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't want to sugarcoat things, because if they're furloughed, they're furloughed. And in some cases, you don't know exactly when you're bringing them back. But what I've seen, my clients who are really up in front of this are communicating with those employees on a regular basis. They're being transparent. They're giving them information and support. So they might be helping them figure out unemployment, helping them kind of navigate, what do I do during this time that I'm furloughed? What can I expect when I come back? You can't over communicate.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I know if I were out there furloughed, I'd want to get information and to have touch points with my company, just so that I know what to expect, day to day, week to week. And so what I'm seeing, I pulled up this slide because what I'm really seeing the best companies are doing right now are, again, prioritizing communication, making sure that employees know what's going on. It's very easy as a leadership team. You may be talking until you're blue in the face about what you're doing around COVID-19, but do your employees know what the response is for COVID-19? So communicating, setting clear and reasonable expectations. Many employees are working remotely, those who are working, and it's hard sometimes knowing what's expected of you when you're working remotely. So making sure that you're very clear about what you expect, what you don't expect. Like if look, we know you're not going to be able to work your full 8 hours. We would like you to get in 6 or 7 good hours, and let them know that. Make sure you're clear, and also think about, for those of you in sales organizations, think about, many of you have goals and expectations that are very clear, but right now, are they reasonable? And how can you modify them? Recognizing good work. It's very easy in the office to stop by and say, hey, Linda, great job. I really appreciate it. You have to be a little bit more intentional about recognizing people, and whenever they're remote, encouraging work-life balance. Many of you have probably seen the numbers, Linda. Working remotely in some cases is adding 2 or 3 hours to people's workday, because they're not commuting, they are stuck at home, so they're logged on until 9, 10 o'clock at night. I think it's important as business leaders to make sure that you recognize that, and occasionally encourage employees, like, look, go outside for a walk, check out at 5 o'clock, it's 3 o'clock, 5 o'clock on a Friday, take that break. And then the last is creating a collaborative culture. Some of the best practices that I've seen in organizations are creating ways for people to connect even if they're remote. So it might be a Facebook group where they have a question that they ask every day for people to engage in, or using things like Microsoft Teams or Zooms to have regular check-ins. Those are really some of the best practices I'm seeing. And then you'll see, I can't stress it enough, remember, businesses, everyone's trying to just get through today right now, but at the end of the day, businesses are not going to thrive post-COVID-19 if they're not able to engage and retain their top talent. And, this is, as you said, Linda, this is an opportunity to really shine or to create disengaged employees. And I think, everyone's really going to remember how did their organization treat them during this time. Even if you were furloughed or laid off,
Mm-hmm.
it's so much about, was it done in a way that was ethical, transparent? Did you feel supported and cared for? So I think it's a real opportunity. The businesses that come out of this strong are going to be stronger than ever, because they're really going to have proven to their employees, even in tough times, we've got your back, and we are going to be, we're going to move through this as a team.
And this is that's wonderful, Kristyn, what you were just saying. And I think this is a perfect time to go into breakout groups, because a lot of you are probably seeing some very good things that are happening at your organization. Some of you may be looking for ideas that you can help foster more of a collaborative culture. So what we're going to do for the next 5 minutes is to go into breakout groups. Feel free to share information with other people and just talk about some of the strategies that your organization is doing to follow through with some of the guidelines that Kristyn has talked about, because I'm sure she's not creating this. This exists, but is everybody doing it?
Oh, and there's no shortage. Like I always say, I'm not the owner of all good ideas. So many of the best practices I've picked up on have been from clients that have shared with me what they're doing. I'm like, that's a great idea. I should share this with other clients as well, if it's okay with you.
Okay, we're going to be in breakout groups, and I think I will be in one, and so will Kristyn. So we will be in some of the groups, or we might even pop around, we'll see. But we'll be in the groups, and we're going to take about 5 minutes. So make sure everybody has a chance to talk and share what they're doing in their organizations. And then we'll come back into the main room, the main group, and we'll discuss some of this. And if you have some really good ideas, we'd like to share it with everybody. Were there any insights or does anybody want to offer some suggestions on what their company might be doing? That's some best practices that they want to share. Maggie, since I'm looking right at you, is there anything specific your company is doing, or what's been working really well?
It's interesting in our breakout, Robin mentioned there's been kind of a down flux in participation from the employees in the last 2 to 3 weeks. And it was so interesting she said that, because I've noticed the same thing. So when we first started to have these virtual coffee breaks and weekly town halls and things like that, just to keep everybody engaged, it was like everybody was jumping on. We even did, every 2 weeks, we did a happy hour. And I've noticed in the last 2 to 3 weeks that people are not participating nearly as much. So I don't know what that is, and I'm not sure how to remedy it. I think people are just kind of putting their heads down and working.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. The glamour wore off of let's have all these Zoom sessions and people get one more session.
It's starting to feel like fluff.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I think that people are not finding, because I was finding at first, they were interacting more with one another on a remote basis than they were when we were physically in the office and open.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Initially, they were responding more.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if they're just feeling like it's a waste of time, if it's too much, or if maybe it's just they've gotten to that hump where everybody is just ready to get back out.
Or how many more of those calls can we have where we're just sharing what we're learning from the experience? Maybe it's interesting in the beginning, and then it's overwhelming that I just can't have this conversation anymore. Let's move on. That perhaps could be an idea. Kristyn, we were in a group together, and then I was extracted from our group.
No, that's what I was with a couple here, actually, with Maggie and her group, and got pulled just kind of as I was getting into the meat, because that's one of the things I've had. A lot of my clients, especially the ones that aren't used to working remotely on a regular basis, have been coming to me with just that. How do we engage people in these calls? And fortunately, I have several clients. I have one client who has 40 employees who are all remote in 25 different states, and that's the only way they interact. So I've been really pulling some best practices from those clients to share with the clients who aren't used to remote. Mm-hmm. And I think some of the things I'm seeing is there is definitely a burnout. So I know even for myself, I was on a ton of webinars early as a participant and also as a presenter. And after a while, Zoom does burn you out. So I think making sure that when you meet with your staff, that there's a specific purpose and agenda. I think, yes, it's still good to check in about COVID-19 and give people some space, but also to kind of get back to business as usual. Because, so what I find is effective is if you have a little bit of a check-in, everyone says hello, gives a little bit of an update on how they're doing, because you don't want to lose you want it to be personal, and people are going through a lot with COVID-19. But then to have an agenda of like, here are the things that we're covering today, and make it feel more like your meetings pre-COVID-19. Because I think everyone kind of wants they want a little bit of familiarity and to get back to business. But I think having that agenda shows people we're not just meeting to meet, we actually have an agenda that we're going to get through.
Well, I'm sorry. Donna mentioned something along those lines, and she said, I think everyone is now wondering when they have to return.
Yeah.
Many questions are unknown, and the questions they want to ask, no one seems to have the answers to. And are they going to keep working remotely, or is that going to change? And the other thing she mentioned is the newness wore off on checking in. Like checking in needs to be reworded to updates.
Yes.
And she said purpose-driven towards the workday week, which is what you're saying too. It's like the check-in, it's like, okay, you keep checking in, that's enough. What can you tell me that I need to know to perform my job?
And that's, I think, saying, hey, we're going to go around and do a quick check-in, 30 seconds, just to keep it from, because I mean, people can talk about COVID-19 and their experiences. You could sit all morning or all afternoon. So I think limitations. The other things too that I think I'm seeing is leading to a lot of burnout or people not joining is fear. I think we have to let go. Again, I came from banking where we were always very professionally dressed, fully prepared for meetings, no children running in asking for snacks. I think kind of giving people permission, like, look, join the call. If you have a dog barking, a child asking for a snack, you're not dressed to the nines that particular day, it's okay. And kind of creating a part of your culture of, come as you are. Certainly if you have the child or the dog, turn off your video or mute as appropriate, but like, you're not going to be docked or judged because you have an interruption or things don't go. We understand everyone's working under unique situations, because I do find that a lot of people aren't willing to join video conferences because they're like, I don't have a jacket on, or my dog's barking, or whatever it might be. And so I think if we're going to do this for the long haul, kind of changing cultural expectations.
And that's a great point, Kristyn, because I think you also have to know your audience.
Yes.
So if you're giving a professional present, I don't think, and I wouldn't have been happy if you showed up very casual with your child running around, but in a team meeting, that might be okay. And so there's going to be different situations that we have to understand. I know other people say they love the authenticity of seeing the CEO and the dog in the background, or other things happening. So it could create more collaboration, and the curtains are opened. It's not like the Wizard of Oz. The curtains are open now and we see where people are, and there's something valuable about that, as long as that's maybe with your team meeting and maybe not with your client meeting. So I think people have to know where they can let their hair down.
It goes back to those setting expectations. Like, my team knows our team meetings where it's just us. If you have on a sweatshirt and no makeup and, I see your child walk through the background, no big deal. I'm just glad you're there and that you're engaged. If you're with a client, here's the expectations for that. And, I think it gives people some comfort in knowing how they should show up.
So I think in conclusion, what you're saying is, set expectations and communicate them.
Yes.
You need to communicate what they are. And I'll add one more thing, because that's my little soapbox. Listen to people. Listen to what their needs are so that you could respond. So yes, there's the checking in, but it's also listening and hearing what they say, and either letting them know why it can't be that way, or hopefully implementing some of the things.
And one best practice, actually, that I've seen a couple clients employ, and along those lines are, I know, especially depending on the size of your organization, you might not be able to speak to each and every employee and get feedback, but a lot of my clients have been sending out surveys to employees, asking them things like, right now we're working remotely, but should we be able to return, or when we return, are you really a must be in the office to effectively do your job? You would prefer to be in the office. You'd prefer to continue working remotely. And if you are working remotely, what challenges do you have that we can help you remove, whether it's getting another screen or getting you better audio equipment, and then taking that feedback and really helping it as you're looking to craft your return to work plan, because many people are going to be staggering. It's important to know which employees are most going to benefit from coming back to the office. Because I know many of us, if everyone came back to the office, it would be very hard to physically distance. And quite honestly, it's just not, especially with many that have children who the schools are closed, it's hard to return physically back to the office. So the survey like that can help you prioritize, like, what are the actual needs of each individual employee and how can we best support them?
Kristyn, this is great information. I'm sure a lot of you are HR professionals, you know this, but some of it's reinforcing that, yes, I'm doing the right thing, and hopefully you shared some ideas. Kristyn, thank you so much. I think this was wonderful. It will be recorded if those of you want to hear it again. And again, we'll have it for those who were not able to attend today. If people have questions, feel free to reach out. Kristyn, they can reach out to you too, I'm sure, by email, and I'll go back and see if I know we had some contact information here. Let me just open that up and put that on the screen here.
Yes, and please feel free to reach out. I have lots of resources that I'd be more than happy to share with any of you. Questions you can be asking your business around COVID-19, various information on the regulations, so don't hesitate.